Welcome to part 2 of our webinar series from JumpStart and ProMedica Innovations. Our topic today is the market, where big ideas become viable businesses. As we talked about last time, all businesses start with an idea, but they only grow when customers are willing to pay for those products and services. And today we're going to be talking about exactly what that looks like for your small business. How to identify and refine your target market, how to validate your business concept, how to figure out the costs and other financial projections that go into doing that. We have a fantastic panel today for you to get some great ideas from and provide some expertise. I'm going to go around in the order that I see you guys here on the slide. So we'll go clockwise. I'm going to start with my good friend Jackie from JumpStart in our Cleveland office. Jackie, kick us off and get us started.
Yeah, hi everyone. I'm Jackie Williams. Like Adam said, I work for JumpStart in the Cleveland office as a market research analyst. So basically, that involves working with entrepreneurs on a regular basis on, choosing and researching their target market and validating demand for whatever they've created.
Love it. Ebony, turn it over to you.
Hi, my name is Ebony. I work at the University of Akron Research Foundation as an Akron Entrepreneurial Fellow. I am also a facilitator for the Mortar program at Bounce for non-tech and minority entrepreneurs. Essentially, what I do is help people kind of clarify their concept in the very early stages. And we mostly do that through direct customer interactions, so helping them with customer discovery. So hopefully they can get closer to validating their product or service or idea or research.
Love it. Gary?
Good morning, everybody. My name is Gary Smith. I'm the president and CEO of a early stage medical device company known as Infinity Angioplasty Balloon Company. We make products for treating peripheral arterial disease, and am a serial entrepreneur, or I would say more of a serial CEO, working with entrepreneurs, helping physician inventors bring their ideas from a sketch on a napkin through the regulatory process and to launch into US and European and Asian marketplaces. I've been in the medical device space my entire career, and probably the last 15, 16 years really focused on starting new companies, raising capital, commercializing, and exiting. Look forward to talking with you all today.
Well done. Anthony?
Good morning, I'm Anthony Goodwin with ProMedica Health Systems. I'm the Director of Business Solutions on our social determinants of health team. So we focus on some of the non-clinical factors of health, such as food access, financial strain, transportation, and I lead our product development work in our employer marketplace. So creating some products to allow employers to be able to gain better insights into some of those factors that can be impacting their employees' health. So glad to be here today.
Love it. Holly, last and certainly not least.
Hi guys, I'm Holly Flanner. I work for a company called Capios Health, which is owned by ProMedica, and we actually partner with healthcare experts to take their ideas and the issues that they see in healthcare, develop it into software that can help better healthcare, and then take it to other healthcare systems across the country that are also struggling with those same issues. I am the marketing coordinator, so that involves working with the inventors from the beginning to really pinpoint those issues, and then making sure when we take that to market that we have the right message and we understand kind of how the consumers are going to receive that message.
Let's dive right in because we have so much to cover and you guys have so much experience that we want to talk about. So I want to jump right in, and Ebony, I'm going to start with you and just maybe kind of kick us off. What is a target market? What does that mean when we're talking about all this stuff, and that's great, but what does that mean?
Mm-hmm. So starting off, a lot of people will say, well, my target market or my target customer is everybody. It's not everybody. And it's also not a building. So some people will be like, oh, it's the hospitals. It's not that either. It's a specific person. And usually if it's business to business, you want to kind of think about what's their job title. And if it's B2C, you kind of want to think about what are some of the qualities or values, current behaviors that your customer might have in common, any activities that they may have or may do that are similar to each other to kind of identify who they are. So one, they're an actual person. You should be able to describe their job title or something about them. Two, they should have the ability and willingness to pay. that's a key thing in identifying your target customer. Also, they should have some kind of problem that your solution, or that you hypothesize that your solution will solve. So sometimes people aren't clear on who their customer is. I try to shift them to getting at least clear on what the problem that they're solving is, and where our current solutions like yours being implemented to help identify where your customer might be. So job title is a person. They should have the ability and willingness to pay, and try to be as specific as you can with whoever your target market is.
Yeah, no, that's a great kickoff. Gary, I'm going to go to you a little bit too. You've been on kind of both sides, entrepreneur and now helping entrepreneurs as well. Talk about how you think about what is a target market?
Well, target market, of course, is a group of customers or potential customers, a group of prospects that you hope want to buy your product or your solutions, and as Ebony said, have the wherewithal to pay for those solutions as well. And target markets can be complex. They can be simple. There's a wide range, of course. In the B2B world, and in particular in my space experience with medical devices, the target market is a healthcare provider, typically a physician, a surgeon, etc. That is the end user, but that market may be all cardiologists, for example, or all interventional cardiologists, interventional vascular surgeons, for example. And then within that, you can take a look at your target market as being that's the end user, but there are decision influencers and decision facilitators within that market space as well. And being able to stratify that complexity really will help you execute a sales plan and eventually to be able to drive a funnel process or a sales process with your target market.
Yeah, really, really well said, both of you guys. And so certainly, my target market isn't everybody who breathes oxygen. We got to narrow it down a little bit. And Gary brought up a great point, starting about how you do that. And Jackie, from your end and how you advise that, okay, that's great. And we're sort of realizing that we got to be a little more specific here. How do you even begin trying to do that, trying to narrow it down?
Yeah, so a lot of times when I'm taking an entrepreneur through this exercise, it could be a software company, it could be medical device, it could be a physical product. At this earliest stage, everything looks the same at this point because you've still got to figure out your target market. And, the visual I always use when working with entrepreneurs is just peeling back each layer of an onion, right? You start with the whole onion, and every layer that you peel off, there's another descriptive factor there. And, for us, usually when we're going through this exercise, honestly, a lot of times entrepreneurs end up with, 20 different directions that they could possibly go in, right? And when that happens, we usually then kind of shift our brainstorming over to the value proposition, right, for each of these potential target markets. And I know the last webinar talked a lot about value proposition and kind of how to put that together, but at that point, you've got to pick one to start, or you're going to have that analysis paralysis, right? And early stage, it's totally okay if, you start down one path only to run into a barrier. All that means is, you take a half step back and you try something else. But to me, that peeling back the onion and that brainstorming piece in the beginning is so important, because you can also then see where you've been and what you've already tried. So target market isn't always readily apparent right from the get-go, right? Often there's a lot of brainstorming that goes into that, but how you move forward is, again, picking that one starting point after you've done that brainstorming.
Mm-hmm. Right. So you're saying find the thing that you think is the lowest hanging fruit, biggest problem to solve, whatever it is, and try and just go from there. Kind of. It brings up an interesting follow up, and I'll kind of open it up to anybody and just let's dive into some maybe specific examples of how do you know that you solve their problem? How do they know they're your customer? What are some specific maybe questions to ask yourself or questions to go in your market validation process? Anybody want to jump in and start off on that one? Just some specific, thoughts for an entrepreneur around where to even begin with this.
So I can chime in for a second. Usually in our exercises when we're doing this brainstorming, our focus is always on features versus benefits, right? Entrepreneurs love to talk about the features of, their software or their device or their other physical product, but really when you're validating, when you're really doing this research, you want to focus on the benefits, right? It's not, what your product does, is why your target customer should care that is really important to them. And so if your research focuses on the benefits, that's usually a great place to start.
Yeah,
I was just going
to go ahead,
Jackie's point here. You can't be successful if you're only trying to figure all this stuff out from within the confines of your office, or nowadays in the confines of your home. You've got to have a network of key opinion leaders, of friends and of non-friends that are going to be very frank and tell you that your baby's not so attractive. If that offends you, you can't survive long in this space. But I think it's so important in the early stages to be out talking to potential customers, talking to your target market entities, and exploring. And that, of course, is going to give you design inputs if you're in a device. It's going to give you interface inputs if you're in software, and it's a lot of whiteboarding. But if you haven't introduced your concept to a lot of people early on to really see if you've got a solution to an unmet need or to a problem, you might get well down the path, spend a lot of money, and jump out in front of the marketplace to crash and burn at that point.
Mm-hmm.
Totally. Go ahead, Ebony.
I wanted to add a little bit. The question was, how do you know you solved the problem?
Yeah, and just maybe some specific, whether it's an example of somebody you've worked with, or how do you know you solved, or just some specific things that people can look at to sort of drill in for their own ideas.
Mm-hmm. I think one of the things is just getting really clear about what would success look like for you and your business as a customer is engaged with your product or service. So if it's an app, I hear stickiness a lot. Are they coming back to the app? Are they trying to refer you to other customers or other potential partners? It being clear when you go into it about what's the feedback that you would need that would validate whether or not this is actually solving the problem. Because them saying like, oh, hey, I'd love to use it, or, hey, you can add me to your pilot, that might not be enough information to say, hey, I think, this is great and I think it will solve the problem, but you need to be clear about what would it look like for this solution to actually be implemented, and how can I measure that?
Mm-hmm. Yeah, that's really well said. And go ahead, Holly, please.
I can give also like a tangible example. So at the company Capios, we have a software that we have released that kind of works across the entire revenue cycle. And before, kind of like Ebony said, we kind of went at the approach of it's everybody in that revenue cycle without really taking time to identify all of those different departments and people and job titles. And guess what? Every job title had a different need and a different problem. So we were doing this very blanket statement of how it would help. And that wasn't resonating with people at the front of it the way it was with the people at the back of it. So we didn't understand why it wasn't getting as much action up at the front as it was in the back. So when we took a step back and we really looked at those people and their job titles and what their real issues were, because they were different than our other customers that were buying it, it totally changed that whole story that we were telling. And we actually gave them a story that they could see themselves in. Before, they couldn't see themselves in the story, and our software was not solving the issues they were having. Generic. So I think knowing your target customer and really putting a name and a title and an issue to them changes the buying process, and it can speed along much faster.
Yeah, really, really well said. And Anthony, I want to kind of bring you in on this as it relates to, as we kind of tie in sort of what is that target market, and understanding that with then validating that out in the market. So maybe just, Anthony, give us a quick, what is market validation, super high level, why it's important, and then maybe tie in kind of what we're talking about to that.
Yeah, so we've hit on it a little bit, but you come up with this great kind of product or service, which is great, but is there a market? To Ebony's point, is somebody willing to buy it? So market validation to me is really twofold. It's is there a demand for your product? If you're entering an existing marketplace, is there a demand for that product or service? But then also, if you're entering a new market, maybe there's not a product like that out there, but is there a problem that your product can solve? So, and I think there's kind of two different approaches to that. So there's that primary market validation, which is you just got to get out there and you're talking to your potential buyers, you're talking to brokers, you're talking to industry leaders, really getting that firsthand knowledge from some of those early adopters. And then on the secondary side, kind of doing that competitive analysis. What else is already out there in the marketplace? What are some of the leading journals in your space saying, to really make sure that as you're building out your business plan, that it fits what the market it will pay for.
Yeah, no, that's right. And now there's a phrase that's been thrown out a couple times, and I want to dig into that a little bit. And Gary, go back to you because you brought it up a few minutes earlier too, and that's that phrase of early adopters. So let's just drill in a little bit. What is an early adopter? Why are they important? And how do those early adopters fit into what we're talking about in terms of validating my ideas in a couple ways that Anthony said, and also sort of maybe being a example of my target market?
Now, early adopters are so important, and in particular in the med tech space, early adopters are key opinion leaders, and key opinion leaders become evangelists for your product and the solution it brings at the price point you positioned it. So understanding and getting familiar with who your early adopters are going to be, you don't do that by chance. You need to really understand who they are before you start throwing out fishing nets to try and find them. Oftentimes they can be advisors to your company, and not necessarily board members, but advisors to the technology development or advisors to your pricing and marketing strategies, etc. And so in looking at then financing and building out a financial pro forma and planning for your sales and revenue, the first year and a half, 2 years are really built on what your early adopters are going to be able to do from a revenue creation. And a second layer to this is you want the feedback from these early adopters, because oftentimes your Rev 1 product in that space is going to have to quickly change to a Rev 2, and your early adopters are going to be the people that give you the feedback on that. They're going to say, this is great, but if it was blue instead of red, I'd buy more of it. And so you've got to be able to listen to those early adopters and adjust on the fly, if you will.
Yeah. Anybody else want to jump in on that and how it relates to market validation? Yeah, go ahead, Emily, please.
So I think for your early adopter, they're usually someone who is seeking some kind of novel solution. They want to try to be cutting edge ahead of the industry. And then also they might feel the pain more acutely. So Don Winkle, he teaches customer discovery at John Carroll, and I like the way he frames it. He says that your early adopter is somebody who has the problem, they know they have the problem, and they're currently looking for a solution. So maybe your target customer, may have the problem and know they have the problem, but your early adopter is the one that has a budget for it. They're making some makeshift solution on their own just to try to, solve the problem. So I think your early adopter is even, they're more on fire than even just your target customer. And then back to the validation piece, I think that being clear about whatever outcomes that you're saying that you're going to improve or deliver for them, measuring them, because then that also would be a testimony for your target customer and to be able to get the next stage of customers, kind of like what Gary was speaking to. So who their target, the early adopter, they're currently looking for a solution or have a budget for it at least.
Yeah, that's really well said, Jackie. I definitely, I was going to go to you anyway. Jackie is our in-house guru on all things market validation and target market. So keep going. Go whatever direction you want to go with that.
Yeah, so to build on what Gary and Ebony were saying, I think the other key thing about an early adopter is, because they are actively feeling this pain and they're currently looking for a solution, they're typically a little more forgiving when the product that they're testing for you is, say, your minimum viable product, not like, the most perfect creation ever, right? And because they have such a pressing need, they are willing to kind of overlook some of the small stuff just to kind of, get something in place faster and get it to start working for them.
Yeah, Jackie, just drill in a little bit on what an MVP is and kind of that stuff. And then Anthony, I'm going to go to you on kind of, okay, that MVP to testing and how that relates to kind of speed to market and how important is it to rush and get something out there. That's kind of where I want to go. But Jackie, start us off.
Yeah, so as I said, so MVP stands for minimum viable product. And, it's essentially, the first product or service that you can functionally put out there. And your goal as the entrepreneur is to spend the least amount of time and the least amount of money before you can get something actively in the market, right? It is the true ugly duckling version of whatever it is that you're offering, right? It's just that basic functionality that, back to Ebony's point, you can measure results with, but again, it does not have to be perfect. In fact, I think there would probably be an indication that something was wrong if it was, absolutely perfect before anyone had ever laid eyes on it besides you as the founder of the company.
Yeah. Anthony, to you, and then Holly, I have a kind of a wrap up on kind of where you see this all. But Anthony, to you on a little bit of the testing side and the speed to market side as far as that MVP. Any thoughts there?
Yeah, I think just to echo Jacqueline's points, I think you just got to get something out in the market and start to test it. And I think about kind of in the cooking world, you have this great recipe and you put it together, but you really don't know how it tastes till you cook it and you try it. So getting that initial both user and buyer feedback to really go mass market. So you want to get some really candid buyer feedback from your target customer. But in our world, we're kind of B2B2C, so we're selling to employers, but really the employee is our end consumer. So being able to gain that initial feedback from the buyer, but also at the user level is just critically important to be able to tweak and enhance and before you go to mass market.
Mm-hmm. That's very well said. And just to kind of put a bow on a little bit of this piece as it relates to some of the other things, Holly, you see things through the process and for more kind of where your expertise is. I hear people sometimes, I know Jackie's going to be smiling, nodding her head, but I have 10 features that I want to put out and this is my brand and it's my product. What you want me to just do this one thing? Just put a bow on all this.
So 100%, we've put products out there and we've started beta testing them within the healthcare system. Maybe only 10% of what the full 100 would be, because like Jackie said, it's a minimal viable product. So it's really, what is that first immediate need we need to address? And then let's build on top of that. And something that can come out really good from a marketing perspective of having early adopters and getting that product out there early is you can get immediate case studies from even that minimal viable product, where you can kind of have, it came out of one department with only this one tool, this one hospital, whatever your industry is, that solidifies that even with only this, we're making a difference. And then you can kind of have that to go forward in the market with, because people like to buy things that other people have tried. And so I always think early adopting helps with software development, but also a ton with the marketing efforts, because you can get those true customer stories from the beginning to be able to go to the market with.
Yeah, great stuff, guys. And let's kind of keep going down this sort of progressive path of building the business. So we've We've talked about all the early adopters and the MVPs and the beta testing. So let's really get into sales. Gary, I want to start with you. And what is a sales cycle? How do you think about starting to sell a product now that you've been able to do some of the stuff we already talked about?
Well, it's a critical component to getting your entire sales and marketing strategy together, right? It's a whiteboard process, if you will. Getting together with early adopters, perhaps, or key opinion leaders, your advisory board, and looking at that entire process from the first, from the introductory call to a prospect, all the way through to execution of the sale, delivery of the product, in-service training, and those kinds of details. So understanding each stage along the way, understanding how to move your customer from one stage of the selling process to the next stage of the selling process. There's a lot of vanilla, or generic, I should say, sales funnels out there that, go from prospect or go from lead to prospect to interested, et cetera. And those are great in helping you form that. But then you need to understand when you're launching a company and launching a new product in the market. And Holly mentioned earlier, you got to be quick to adjust, and you're going to find that maybe the path you thought was so clear is not so clear. And so be able to quickly adjust and find a different route or a different speed of moving through that cycle. I think it's important, to bring in early stage companies, bring in sales professionals. Entrepreneurs are not always sales professionals. They may be, software engineers, musicians, et cetera. But finding someone that's in that market segment that you're targeting, that understands that can bring relationships with your target key opinion leaders, but that really can help define that sales cycle from the experience that they've had with other companies, is so key. And I'm a firm believer you bring that on very early on in the process. You want to build that understanding into your early pro formas so that you're not over-committing and under-delivering your revenue expectations, because I thought it would only take 30 days to get into this hospital. Guess what? It took 6 months before I even got a trial for the catheter, and another 6 months before the purchasing department decided to start writing purchase orders to us. So,
Yeah, a lot of great stuff there, Gary. Ebony, I saw you nodding your head and smiling several times. Jump in, please.
I think just understanding the decision-making process and the decision-making unit is like key there, because you might think this is the department that's gonna be using my product, but you might not know that there's actually a different department that evaluates the budget that exists, and there might be even people within that department that qualify different levels of purchasing. So maybe this person, they can handle it if it's less than $10,000, but if it's more than $10,000, they handle it. And then if they handle it, they need this level of approval. So being really clear on the decision-making unit, and trying to get as clear as you can before you even, make, projections, I think is kind of critical, or wise anyway.
Yeah, Jackie, go ahead.
Yeah, and I just want to add, there's so much that you can learn about the sales cycle during the validation stage, right? The wrong time to start learning about what the sales cycle looks like is when you're ready to start selling, right? Ideally, you will have learned almost everything you need to know before you're trying to sell. So then when you go in and with an actual sales pitch, you already know exactly what their response is hopefully going to be because you've done your research ahead of time. And so often, when we talk about the sales cycle, there's so many, especially when you're selling in a B2B environment, there's so many different players involved. You've got the end users, you've got the decision makers, you've got all of the influencers who maybe don't get to make the decision, but they certainly will have a say. And you've even got like the saboteurs or the naysayers, right? It's so important as the entrepreneur to go in understanding, all of those roles and sort of, just be ready for any objections or questions that they're going to ask you. And again, that validation stage, there's so much that you can learn just by having a conversation where you're not trying to sell your product. In fact, you know, I've seen entrepreneurs have the most success when they go in and they have conversations with these types of stakeholders where they're not even mentioning, you know, their product or what it is that they've created, right? Instead, they're focused mostly on, you know, what are you doing today to solve this problem? And what are the challenges related to that?
Mm-hmm.
Opportunity arises to talk about their product, maybe at the end of the conversation or something, sure. But, you know, the second that you mention your product or service, what you're offering, it just inserts bias into that conversation. So you really want to try to avoid that early on, especially.
Yeah, that's a great point. And so just to expand a little bit quickly on some of the sales cycle, and Gary talked about, there's just so many factors. Gary talked about getting a sales professional in early. You know, Jackie just talked about, and I know the folks at you know, ProMedica Innovations and on the life science side certainly deal with this all the time. Of your user could be different than your payer, could be different than, you know, all those other things. And then there's also, like Ebony said, there's all these other factors, like how long does it just take to go through the process of getting to the decision maker who's leveraging the end user to hear if that's what they want to use. So anything else just as it relates to managing the sales cycle, understanding the sales cycle? Anybody else want to jump in on that quickly?
Yeah, I'll just add something we learned quickly was also to really understand when the buyer buys. So in the benefit world, you know, by June of any given year, employers have their benefit selection packages. You know, they've made purchases and they're starting to build out benefit guides to roll out for the fall for open enrollment. So, you know, we quickly learned you've got kind of a 6 month, 5 to 6 month early year window to really be out as the benefit reps for companies are in the buying phase. And by June, those decisions are locked up and they're really not revisiting again until the next fiscal year. So that was something we learned really early in the validation process.
Yeah, really good point. Holly, it sounded like you had something too.
Yeah, I just wanted to say too, I mean, during that validation stage of going through your market, I think you can kind of make some hypotheses around like, hey, like for instance, we have non-governmental and government hospital systems. So we kind of came up with an assumption that probably non-gov would be a shorter sales cycle. So you kind of like put those things into place and you kind of put your own subjective timelines around this will be a shorter sales cycle, this will be longer. And then obviously once you're in the sales cycle, you'll start to validate if you were completely crazy or if you had something there. But I think kind of setting those types of hypotheses up around your customer helps to kind of categorize what is going to be your quicker sales cycle and what's going to be a longer one.
Yeah.
And I was just going to add one other thing, Adam, in this discussion. It's such an important part. You know, when you are in early stage enterprise and you're building out your financial forecasts and you're sharing that with investors, or maybe you're fortunate that you're just going to do it all with your own cash. But the reality of what we're talking about, sales cycles and the length of those cycles from day one to the checks written, and understanding that and building that into your pro forma. So if it takes you a year to sell a big system, and you say I'm going to launch on January 1, you're not going to show any revenue on your pro forma until January 1 of the following year. I'm exaggerating, I hope. But the other component that lays on top of that, and you know, creates some very extraordinary spreadsheets as a result, is the maturity of your sales team. So on top of the selling cycle, let's say it's a 8-week selling cycle. You know, when you hire a new salesperson into your organization, it's going to take 90, 120, 180, you know, maybe longer days before they're really effective to being salespeople. And then you layer that on top of the selling cycle time. So it's, you know, you don't want to say, well, I hired salespeople in July, so my revenue immediately went up. Because typically that's not the case. I know there's some technologies out there where they go hand in hand like that, but typically you got to build in the maturity and experience of the sales team as well as the selling cycle.
Well said. And you guys are making my job really easy, because just to give a little preview, we're going to have a whole nother part in our webinar series of talking about funding and money and all that stuff. and I actually wanted to pivot a little bit. And Anthony, I'm going to start with you, picking up on where Gary left off. Let's talk a little bit about going to that next step of just some high-level stuff, and Anthony, and then we'll go around. What do I need to know about any of the things we've talked about, but also my costs in building out some financial projections, just how this is going to look?
Yeah, I think a lot of times we start at the end and we have an idea and we know generally how we want to price it or how we want to sell it, but really understanding every cost that will go into the business is important to think about building a viable business. So everything from just kind of those initial startup costs around product development. Am I going to have any legal fees? Do I need to get contracts? Do I need to think about patents? Getting contracts developed, R&D costs, everything that's really going to go into even getting out and selling. And then of course those ongoing costs around staffing and overhead. What do my fixed costs look like if I'm selling 0 units? If I'm selling 25 units, do my variable costs change? And then as Gary mentioned, what's my cash flow? So is this a product that people buy as a one-time kind of at point of service? Is this something that employers pay, in our case, per employee per month, and your revenue is really split across 12 months? But I think really having a keen sight on what are your costs, and then using that as your baseline, and then you can think about your margin and what your actual kind of market price will be.
Yeah, I see a lot of heads nodding. Anybody else want to jump in on that one?
I will add one other thing.
Yeah.
Spreadsheets are never static. And sometimes I find people get really frustrated because they're like, well, I did a spreadsheet and ran up the COGS, and I did this 3 months ago. And the reality is, if you're not tweaking your pro forma or your spreadsheet or looking at your COGS on a very regular basis and making those adjustments, you'll get way behind the curve. And COGS, as Anthony said, it's detailed around components as well as the times, as well as fixed and variable costs, etc. But sometimes I find working with innovators, they think, well, we did our spreadsheet, now we're moving on to other things, and so we'll just use that one for the rest of our fundraising campaign. It never happens.
Mm-hmm.
And when you're out raising capital, and I know this is your next subject, somebody's going to ask you a question that changes your whole pro forma anyhow, and you're going to have to get back in.
The guys with the gold are the kings and queens, aren't they? Tell us how to do it. Ebony, I saw you on your head, and you kind of see it on both ends. I think from you see the research side, but you also deal with entrepreneurs who may be trying to build this stuff themselves. What are your thoughts here?
Also, I'm building what?
Just in general, as as you see it, I'm looking to sort of figure out, how do I put a financial projection together? I'm going to go raise money. Anything what am I not thinking of that I should include, or what comes up? What do you see come up that people wish they knew that they didn't know before? Things like that.
What I don't personally deal with financial projections that much, but I can say that I think it's probably wise to be a little critical about what channel you're actually going to be going about, and that initial one, thinking about what's the cost to actually acquire a customer through that specific channel. Because you may have this idea about this is how this is going to get to my customer, but being a little bit more critical about, is that the most effective way to do it, where you can minimize your cost and maximize your return. So I think being a little bit more critical about the channel, and then also your strategy for how you will charge them, your revenue model, because I think also those two kind of go hand in hand and trying to figure out what's the best way to minimize my costs to acquire them as a customer, and then maximize my dollars back. And then I think Gary made a really good point, is like there's some also social things that you have to factor into your financial projections. You hire a rock star salesperson, but then they don't really fully understand the customer or the product, and they're trying to learn that. So taking that into account, but also I've heard people say you might want to take into account the people that you have to hire in your financial projection. So a lot of times people will say, you know, by year 5, we should be selling this much and we should be making this much money and this will be, you know, our profit. But they're not thinking about, oh, well, in order to sell that much, you need to hire this many more people. You need to spend this much more money on marketing. So considering also, you know, your path to growing to be the best company ever, what's it going to actually take in your cost to get to that point?
Yeah, so I hear you saying, I mean, as Gary said, there's these COGS or cost. Go ahead. Oh, okay. You know, there's these costs, these hard costs, but then there's also some of these costs, people marketing, which we'll talk about in a little bit. Anybody want to cycle before we sort of move on to that market? Good. All right. Well, this is not my area of expertise, so I'm glad you guys are here. And Holly, I'm going to start with you because you deal with this so much. But from where I sit as an entrepreneur and coaching entrepreneurs, the word that always goes with sales is marketing. Sales. So, what is that, and how do I do it, or how do I start thinking about it at least?
So so specifically branding, when you start to brand your company, I think that there's a lot more that goes into it than a lot of people even want to wrap their heads around. The good news is, though, is that it's actually pretty easy, but it just takes a little bit of thought from the beginning. And I think the more thought you put into your strategy, it's going to totally shape your entire company. Someone I want to point out that has a great book and a lot of theories on this is Donald Miller. He has a company called Story Brand. And what they're finding is that people really resonate with stories that they feel like can be a part of. So I think if you look at the list of some of these things, it's really interesting to read about how to craft your brand around a story. But so I think the different elements that are involved with branding, one of the big things is what's your message and what's the way it's going to look like. Messaging would just be talking like we've talked this whole time, talking to your customers, really seeing what their pain points are and making sure that you're using their lingo. A lot of times in different industries, there's buzzwords that they resonate with and make it look like you know what the heck you're talking about. So just having those things figured out. And then a tool that I like to use for actually coming up with my look for a company is called Canva, and it's free. And you can go in and you can create really professional looking social media graphics, flyers, and you can put your colors in there and use your fonts, and it's going to make it look like your company is very cohesive.
Yeah, really, really well said. Ebony, go ahead.
There's Don Norman. I think he's like big on design. He has a book, I think it's called The Design of Everyday Things. But one of the principles that he talks about is that there's 3 basic levels to design. One is the functional level. Like, does your product actually deliver on what it says it's going to do? And then it's the visceral level. So that's like, what's your fonts? What's your colors? What's your logo? What's your tagline? That piece of it that's going to attract them to it. And then the last piece is the reflective piece. So this is the part where people can tell a story about your product. And this goes into the story brand. And that was a good book. Highly recommend reading it. But how can someone feel better as a result of engaging with your product? So for me, an example of going to the store and seeing that the company is employee owned, I can take that and say, you know, I feel better about myself and incorporate that into my brand. So usually, you know, you also want to, in the reflective piece, you want to make the person the hero. Like, you're not the hero. You know, they have some aspirational identity that they want. They have some objective that they're trying to achieve. And you're just the guide to help them get to whoever they want to be or whatever outcome that they want to have, and help them avoid failure somehow and get to success. So I think your brand in general is like all the memories, the relationships that you want to have with your customer, and what's that thing that you want them to remember you by, the whole kind of essence.
Yeah, really well said. I want to maybe just back up a second and talk about we're doing a great job on brand, and this is super important. And I want to pick up on something we talked about earlier. And Jackie, I'm going to start with you and back to Holly, because I know you guys deal with this on the front end. And then Jackie, you kind of see them come out the other side. When do I need to start thinking about this? To both of you ladies, but Jackie.
Yeah, so as is the answer to that, right? I mean, you know, it starts often in the earliest stages when you're taking a look at, you know, how other companies or solutions are coming in to solve this problem, right? I mean, we always, you know, if I'm working with an entrepreneur, we focus on, you know, first of all, like, yeah, how are other companies, you know, positioning themselves to solve this problem? But then also on your own side of things, it's, you know, what are your strengths and what do you want your company to be known for? You know, and then just kind of putting the puzzle pieces together and determining where you fit. I mean, it's going to change probably many times over the course of your early stages of your company. And so, yeah, the earlier you can start thinking about this, the better. Now, that doesn't mean, you know, the first things you should do are, you know, spend a whole bunch of money to, you know, create a logo and a website on day one. But it does mean more so, you know, thinking about that positioning, thinking about, you know, what do you want your company to be known for, right? And it helps to have that, you know, I talked earlier about the features versus benefits mindset. You know, it helps when you want your company to be known for providing a benefit, not just a feature, right? That's always a good place to start thinking and brainstorming about what that looks like for your business.
Holly, any thoughts on that? I'm sorry, I got a little echo.
No, it's okay. Yeah, I completely echo what you guys have been saying. I think another interesting thing that some people may or may not know is that your brand does have a personality, like you guys have been saying. And so what is that personality? Are you adventurous? Are you hipster? Are you somebody like our company, for example, we call ourselves Healthcare Insiders. So we want to be that partner with you. We actually live and breathe healthcare, and that's the tone we want to give to our buyer. But there's so many different tones out there. But I think the more you can refine that strategy, refine your personality, refine your color palette, make it simple, it helps your buyer understand the story and understand. You don't want to overcomplicate it. You don't want them drowning in all this information. You want to have it really clear that they understand who you are, what your mission is, and kind of what your purpose is for them even coming to you. And I think that, like Jackie said, you can refine that and you can keep working on it. But I do think that it is important to kind of figure out those basic elements from the beginning, because that's going to help your buyer understand what the heck you're trying to do.
Yeah, Anthony, I want to go to you and circle back to something you said earlier, but Holly and Jackie both, and Jackie used a great word, positioning, and Holly kind of picked up on that. And so, Anthony, whether it's, you know, including it in that market validation piece or some of the sales things that we talked about, how do you see that and kind of starting off early, positioning what you're trying to do and kind of doing that thoughtfully? Any thoughts there?
Yeah, I think that's really important. And I think to Ebony's point about kind of more and more, I think people are looking for a purpose behind a brand. So you still got to have a strong product or service, but more and more people want to know what's the purpose, what's the mission of your brand. So I think that goes into positioning as well as from just kind of a market and service perspective. How do you want to be seen in the brand? Are you you know, a value brand? Are you an affordable kind of product? Are you a luxury premium kind of product? So I think it's important to understand how you want to position the brand and how you want to be seen to the buyer. And then I think message testing is important as well. So you have this brand, but you'd be surprised how much font color, too lengthy of an ad, you know, the type of visuals that are used can really throw off the audience. So I think as much message testing as you can do is important too.
Yeah, well, very well said. I mean, go ahead.
I just want to add also the piece that you are also a brand. So like when you're networking and you're trying to leverage those relationships, like you also have to figure out what's the best you that you want to put forward, because that's gonna, like, relationships are gonna be the foundation of the brand, and you are the relationship builder, at its core. So not just thinking about the business, but also like yourself and what kind of values you want to embody.
Yeah, very, very well said. And one more quick kind of drill in here before we wrap up. Let's just talk real quickly about, we've thought about how to establish this brand. Quick first steps in, okay, how do I market that brand? Holly, I'm going to start with you and maybe go back around.
Okay, yeah, I think the most obvious one, right, is getting your website created. That's a really easy way to have a place for your customers come learn more about you. And then it's always important to have calls to actions, things that they could either download and give you their contact information, blogs that they can read about and get more information. Because I think while your website is great, you have to look at it as a way to generate leads as well. And you need to have places that they can give you their information, whether or not they know that that's the end purpose. So you always want to have things that they can download, things that they can take action on, so that you can kind of start to interact with those people who are coming to your site. And then social media, obviously, right? I mean, you can do LinkedIn. Like I said, Canva, great tool to generate really professional looking LinkedIn, Instagram, Facebook ads. You can do it free. Not everything has to be paid. And then I think influencer marketing. So we do a lot of trying to position ourselves as experts in this field. I don't necessarily need someone to endorse my product. That'd be wonderful. But even if I sponsored a webinar like this, where I could just get an influencer to talk about the problem, they don't even need to plug my software as the solution, but it's going to position me as somebody in this industry that can be trusted, somebody that knows what we're talking about. So I think website, social media, getting in with those influencers, those are like great ways that you can leverage yourself as someone who's capable of playing in the arena you're in.
Yeah, Gary, to you quickly here, and that word influencer is something you talked about earlier, champions, and you used a couple other words around that, and you've been through this process from, establishing something to sales to marketing. Give us some thoughts here.
Hire a professional.
That's really well said, and I know you're kind of half joking, but in seriousness, expand on that a little bit, because that's a
Yeah, the skills that someone like Holly brings and Jackie Abity, the experience they've had there, focused on messaging, on positioning, is just really key. And I think it's a lot on the plate of an entrepreneur to try and say, I'm going to own all that, as well as product development and regulatory and all that. And there's so many nuances, especially, newer communication methods that are so important to customers today. Different than the old days of, making some sales sheets and putting them in mail and sending them out to targets. So myself. But I think one of the questions that comes to mind that I deal with early on in an early stage company is, what's important at this point? Do I market the company, or do I market do I brand the company, or do I brand the products and its technology? What mind share is going to be most important for a successful launch to get our early adopters, and then maybe phase in one or the other. Sometimes the company name represents the technology; those fit well. A lot of times, when I've talked to technology entrepreneurs, they've got some great, space age name around their technology, but it doesn't translate to anything at the customer's end. So it doesn't really do any good to really focus on that. It does more, creates more of an awareness and recognition, and going to bring people to their website if they're perhaps focusing on branding the products and technology themselves. So that's the discussion I always have with someone that really understands the space and how to execute.
Yeah, really well said. I am going to give you guys a chance to think and catch your breath. We are going to go to the 20-second lightning round. Final thought from each of you. And just to give you a second to kind of gather your thoughts up, we've covered a lot of ground here, from target market to validation to sales to branding to marketing. So I want to go 20 seconds, and I'm going to cut you off because we're running out of time. But just give us one takeaway or sum up one thing or one action item, one thing that somebody can take out of this to really take some action on or kind of sum this up. And we'll go, I'm going to just go clockwise as I see it. Holly, starting with you.
Okay, so I would say I think the biggest takeaway I'm even getting from this conversation is just put some thought into it. You may have it all in your head, but write it down, look at your strategy on paper and look at really where am I going with this? Have I hit some of these main points that we've talked about today? The more you can get out on paper and make a clear, cohesive strategy, the more your buyer is going to understand it.
Perfect. Anthony, 20 seconds.
Yeah, I'd say along those lines, failing to plan is planning to fail. It may seem tedious, but take the time to really have a well thought out business plan. Otherwise, when you get into the market, you're going to have to do it anyway. So plan ahead.
Yeah, I love it. Jackie?
Yeah, so, market validation never stops, whether it's, day one or whether you've been in business for 3 years. And, if there's one question that I always advise people to ask whenever they're talking to someone, it's, are you open to a follow-up conversation? Because networking is such a big part of what you do as the founder, building those relationships. You never know when a conversation 2 years down the road could turn into a major sale. So always keep that in mind when you're doing these validation conversations.
Great point. Ebony?
One of my favorite quotes is, "He who knows his customer best wins." So I like to encourage people to flex their empathy muscles, really listen to your customer, understand their problems, and try to solve them instead of being so bent on you have the best idea. You need to figure out what's the best way to solve problems for the people you're serving.
Well said. Gary, wrap us up quickly.
Real quick, you know what? I've always said this is a contact sport that we're in, and I think that's reflected in everybody's statement. If you, as an entrepreneur, you're not out talking to potential customers, talking to suppliers, talking to investors, networking, then you won't make progress at the speed you really need to make progress to be successful. I just can't I can't overemphasize the importance of sharing your idea, exploring it with others. A lot of times people want to hold it inside and not tell anyone what they're thinking about. That's not the way to do it.
Exactly right. Guys, thank you so much. I'm going to go quickly because we're running a little short on time, but that was so great, so informative. Thank you to all our panelists. Thank you so much to ProMedica Innovations for putting this all together with us. You can see on your screen what JumpStart does and how to apply to JumpStart. I just want to make sure that we are very clear and open and welcoming that JumpStart and our collaborators, UARF, ProMedica Innovations, and all the other partners that we work with every day, we are here to provide free resources for entrepreneurs. So please come talk to us. We collaborate every single day regularly. This is what we're here to do to help to help you turn your idea into a business. And we'll be back in a couple weeks with a follow-up on finding funding to grow our business now that we've done all these other things. So talking about all the different kinds of funding available, from grants to venture capital and all that stuff. So again, thank you all so much for joining us. Panelists, thanks again. That was wonderful. Have a great day, and we'll see you in a couple weeks for part 3.